Welcome. I have to say it's been a tough couple of days, and this topic is really, really close to my heart because I have a mom who is navigating Alzheimer's as well. And I got a call late last night and again this morning about her situation. And so I'm a little emotional about this because it's so close to home. So we're going to have a great chat. For those of you who don't know me, I actually am the founder of LifeWorks Well, which is an HR consultancy, and I help scaling organizations create healthy, high performance, and heart-centered cultures. So if you are into that, you're at the right place. So this month, I've been delivering these mentor circles pretty much since about April, and when pandemic hit us, and I support leaders, HR professionals, and entrepreneurs who don't maybe have that support because they're not part of an organization, or they just aren't getting the supports they need. So I have different people showing up all the time, and I welcome everybody. It's just a way of having a dialogue versus just me talking to you. So I encourage anybody to put comments in the chat, and you know, we will talk a little bit about what I've learned, some strategies and tips, and also some guidance for those individually impacted, but also those that may be able to help employees in their workplace. So for those who have joined me before, you know I always start with some quotes, and you know, usually they're really, really inspiring, but this is a little bit of a tougher topic. So, but I think that when you hear from Bill later, you're gonna, you know, understand, you know, what can be important in dealing with forms of dementia and mental health. Today is Bell Let's Talk Day, so it's there's a lot of challenges with the pandemic, and navigating caregiving is really, really difficult. And I just have one more thing to read to you before we get going. And it is from my sister-in-law, who also has navigated, of course, now I have to find this. It's just one of those days. Hey, when you have lack of sleep, it's not a good thing. Patty, here she is. My sister-in-law, her mother had Alzheimer's. She's passed away long ago. So I reached out to her and said, you know, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give people? And I'm just going to read what she sent me. So she said, my thoughts always were one day at a time. I never corrected or disagreed. If she called me Evie, her sister, that is who I would be that day. Take as much help as people are willing to give to protect your sanity and keep you patient and kind. Include them as much as possible in conversations. I believe that have a lot going on deep down in their conscious, just totally unable to communicate it. And if possible, find, oh, this part you may not agree with, but she says, if possible, find a black pill. Hopefully in time, individuals will have the right to pre-arrange for a peaceful death. So as I said, this is a little bit deep today because seeing this firsthand is very, very challenging when you see someone losing yourself. So I'm going to just, I will be sharing this presentation after. There's resources at the end as well. Alzheimer's Society of Canada is one great place to start. But I just thought I'd share a little bit about that because that is my experience. I'm going to just introduce you. There's some statistics here too. Dementia, you know, Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia, but it's not just memory loss, you know, so there's a lot wrapped up in understanding Alzheimer's. I had to educate myself a lot about the stages. Bill's going to share his thoughts too. So let's get into that. So welcome, Bill. I really, really appreciate you agreeing to come on and share your journey, firsthand experience with this. I love what Bill says that, you know, first he's a dad, a son, and a human. The professional is really part of what we do, and that's why life works well. To me, work is just part of life. He is a great support. We met at ADP Canada years ago in completely different roles, and we've chatted about our experiences, and really that's what you need, is that support network. So I'm going to, you can read about Bill later, just a wonderful human being, and he's, you know, thankfully sharing his experience, because it's not always easy to talk about it. So I'm just going to stop my share for a minute and have Bill, if you could jump out. And I'm just going to ask you a couple questions, and then feel free to enter comments in the chat, any questions. So Bill, if you wanted to come out, let me just put this on speaker view. I see, where is Bill?
Let's see.
It's going to stop.
I think you just muted yourself.
Okay. There we go.
Thank you. We need Pam's t-shirt. She has a t-shirt that says unmute yourself.
Unmute hashtag.
So thanks again, Bill. I am going to put myself on mute after, because I will maybe have a barking dog eventually. So
that's okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to start by, well, saying thanks again, but you know, if you're okay with sharing your journey and, you know, maybe some of the signs that started you to understand there's awareness, because you have, I think, both your dad's and your mom's story to share with us, and, you know, how you navigated it. And just, again, if anyone has a question, this is interactive, but so I'm just gonna leave it over to you, and thanks again.
Well, thank you, Helen, and good morning to everybody. And I really appreciate everyone taking the time to really join Helen and myself today. As Helen mentioned, I've known Helen for a number of years. We met through ADP, and we've have similar experiences. And when she first called me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in joining the group today?" The first thing I thought was, well, what do I really talk about? Because, you know, what are my takeaways? And my situation with my dad is no longer with us, but it's been about 3 years now. And it's always painful to see someone, you know, with Alzheimer's. And quite frankly, this was our first experience, and my first experience. I mean, traditionally, you know, I've always had grandparents, and they lived a very long age, and that was it. So we were never faced with any challenges. And quite frankly, while I thought I was prepared, I realize even now that I could have never been prepared. But with that really said is, I mentioned to Helen that for today's conversation is that, you know, I see there's a number of folks, my colleagues from BLG, that have joined, and it's great that you're here today to support me and to maybe learn something, take something away. There's HR professionals, and you might be wondering how this might apply in your particular situation if you have employees or colleagues that are going through similar type situations, and perhaps you may be going through a situation yourself with having to care for a parent or someone with Alzheimer's and dementia. So again, I thought that, you know, how do I tailor my conversation? And I thought, well, I'm willing to answer any questions. I mean, I will sum it up and say that my experience with my dad, and I'm currently going through similar type situations with my mom, has really been a journey of self-discovery. I think that would be the best way for me to describe it. Of course, there's always going to be a range of emotions that you know, I and others will go through when having to support someone. But you know, my goal today is to sort of have some takeaways for everyone, and in the hopes that, you know, your journey could be a little bit more of a journey of self-discovery as well. I cannot, and I'll give you a little bit of background. I mean, my dad, when I want to talk about my dad today, my dad was a very strong guy and a very stubborn guy. So never wanted to go see a doctor. He thought he had the cure for everything. And, but I also realized that a lot of that was just trying to be strong for everybody else. And whether it was his lifestyle when he moved to Canada that impacted him, my dad did have and struggle with a very rapid onset Alzheimer's and dementia. When he finally started to really experience the effects of this cruel disease, I did notice many things in the beginning, but I dismissed them because, again, I wasn't exposed to anyone who ever had Alzheimer's. It was just, I knew about it, had no experience. But now I'm looking back with observations, what some of my expectations were, even the role of family dynamics and career. Because, I'm part of the sandwich generation. So I have older parents, an older parent, younger kids. There's a lot that actually even plays into the overall impact of having to help someone with Alzheimer's. So it's also about balancing life and, looking after yourself, and how do you support those that are going through it. So with that said, Helen, I can just give a little bit of background, but we can open it to questions. I'm not sure what the format you'd like to have. But I can give you a little bit of my history. Just let me know how much time I have so I don't.
Yeah, no, you know what? And just, I for those who have joined me before, it's really interesting because I always have someone new. And as you can tell, sometimes it's go with the flow, because it's all about connection and communication. And obviously some people that were here today are drawn to this. We did get a question, Bill, on, when, that you just mentioned it, the first time, like when you're starting to see this little signs and what can you do? And I want you to share more of your history, but for me personally, my mom has been through a lot in her life. And after my brother had passed away, he had actually cared for her a lot because he was on a retirement because of disability. But anyway, another story for another day. But that's really, she declined after being a caregiver for my stepfather, who had died of cancer. And prior to that, my dad died years ago. So she's had a really challenging life. And so she was on her own, and we would check in, and we started to notice, things in the freezer, just little signs, like she was still together, but then, maybe finding a wrapper, a chip wrapper in another odd place, like in with the magazines, or just tiny little things. And then obviously the memory, like repeating. So, before we moved her, unless you're there all the time, you may not notice, right? So you do have to be in tune. We also had a question about where to start. And, one of the reasons I do this, Pam, and for others, is not everybody has EAP, right? So employee assistance programs. And I want Bill to touch on that because sometimes they don't even really help. But anyway, you need to start somewhere. And I would say starting with like research from the Alzheimer's Society understanding, but starting with the GP, and you have to advocate for your parents because, I was, trying to find out what's going on. And I was, getting all kinds of different answers, and being part of the sandwich generation, having to navigate all of that when you're trying to work full time and take kids to hockey, and then it's not fun. So yeah, being an advocate, and the medical world, like Canadian Alzheimer's Society, they have many chapters. There's a lot more information online now than there was like five years ago or so. So Bill may talk about his resources. So Bill, when you talk about, first your dad and how you navigated that, and now, dealing with your mom, like where did you go for those resources as well? And what signs, like, did you pick up on, and any recommendations on, how to help those as a caregiver, right? And we're not professionals. So just a caveat at the beginning, we're not professionals. And I don't recommend that you try to become one. We can talk about that later. Probably chatting with one of his kids at home.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm the worst planner sometimes.
It's the
So,
safe space. It's okay. It's
but it
all
gives
good.
me the opportunity to delegate to my son to actually do something. So he's actually helping out. But I apologize.
So long-winded comments and questions, but if you want to just share next,
Yeah.
and then we'll try to make sure we address anybody.
Sure. Well, you know what? I mean, everybody's journey is a little bit different. In the beginning, and my dad, when I started now looking back, really realizing some of the early signs, and we'll get to the resources, is that I did notice that, you know, sometimes when I'm leaving his home, for example, he would constantly repeat to me that, you know, to be careful, there was a brand new stop sign installed down the street. And this was always a reminder. My mom would tell me stories about, you know, how he might see a blinking light and interpret it as, you know, something's on fire, or, you know, misinterpreting common things. He wasn't the type that would, you know, leave his key somewhere and forget. And he definitely didn't forget events that happened, you know, very long ago. But I just thought for the most part in the beginning that, you know, he was just reminding me, and it was just denial, ignoring, you know, just thought, okay. But it wasn't until there were other health issues, you know, whether it was, you know, anything, and it could be anything, any other health issues, from indigestion to a headache, that would really start to multiply the effects of the Alzheimer's. So then, you know, for him, it was, you know, his mood would change. I'd notice mood swings, a little bit of, you know, he'd be a little lethargic sometimes. He'd want to get involved. Now, my dad was always someone too that always kept busy, but, you know, it was times 10. So he would always want to do something and try and, you know, try and become involved. So these were some behavioral changes I noticed. And again, it wasn't, you know, I even saw him taking refuge in having, you know, I'm from the Greek community, you know, we have a drink, it's ouzo, it's alcohol, you know, usually a 1 ounce, like half an ounce is fine, but he'd fill up a glass as if it was water and just sit and drink. So whether he was choosing to self-medicate or not, these were behaviors that were not typically normal to my dad. In terms of resources, though, I did learn a lot, because the one challenge is that while there's a lot of material out there, and I'll speak for myself, because I also want to talk about the work aspect too and the impacts of the work later. But in terms of resources, there are a lot of resources, and there is a lot of material you can read. And I read it, and it was provided to me. And I even was fortunate enough to work for a company that provided EAP. But I didn't find any of that helped, because while you can read a book about being healthy, unless you really take action, you know, you're not healthy. And there's a lot of material out there that says, you know, here's what the disease is, but you need to live it or talk to somebody that actually has experienced it, that can actually be support. We often rely on our family, but the family tends to do one of two things. In my case, they either will listen and not really connect because they haven't experienced it, or they'll avoid it altogether. So you might find yourself, as I did, with individuals that did want to listen but couldn't offer help, and others who just stopped calling me altogether because they just didn't know what to say. So that plays on an individual as well. But in terms of agencies, we did back then look at the CCAC to come and do an assessment, as they say that they'll do, to make sure the home is safe for the individual with Alzheimer's. But at the same time, the home needs to be safe for the primary caregiver as well. So the government was there in terms of trying to offer some support, but oftentimes it's never enough, because the real battle is the battle that is happening up in someone's mind, in someone's, not only the person experiencing Alzheimer's, but the family that's directly impacted by Alzheimer's, as mine was. So these were some of the challenges, and that's why I say it's self-discovery. But we are fortunate enough to have medical to be able to do exams. So the doctor did look at my dad. They did do some routine tests. They did find that he was struggling with an early form of Alzheimer's and dementia. Looking back, and for those of you who do have parents, you know, that pick up these signs, I can say, and I'll be very candid, is that seeing a doctor and a professional does help alleviate some of the concerns. But quite often enough, because there is no cure, and you know, the adage of a pill for every ill exists, the prescription my dad was actually put on to sort of slow down the progression of his Alzheimer's and dementia is something that impacted him in a negative capacity elsewhere in his health. So that was something that I didn't really realize until much later. So while I was trying to help him in one respect, it was really causing some impact on the other end. And that's where my advice to everyone, and those of you, like I said, who are going through it, is to make sure you ask the right questions. Because you don't want to help on one end, because you really want to help the individual. I get it, but you're causing a problem somewhere else. Because my dad was fine for the most part. We could live with it. He, you know, it's normal for him to get up in the middle of the night and wander a little bit. It was normal for him to sometimes sleep during the day because, you know, you'll see sometimes, you know, the individual may take more time sleeping during the day and they may be up at night because they'll confuse night and day. You know, if there's no violent tendencies, it's to be expected. And with that, I would say have some patience. But what you really need to watch for sometimes is these events. And by events, I mean is that if there's any other health issues, if there's any type of medication that negatively impacts the person, because what happens is, and again, I'm not a professional, but my dad's baseline was here. And what happened was, with his medication, and he had an episode that required him to go to the hospital, which was unrelated to the Alzheimer. Now his baseline is here. And it's hard, if not impossible, to get back up here. And I saw that with my dad. So basically, he was fine. We got used to a certain level, and then something else happened, and then he would drop to here. And the drop was sudden. So that's where family, and that's where being proactive is important, is to help the individuals manage their daily routines and their health. You may be able to get help by, you know, someone visiting 1 or 2 times a week for an hour or two if the person needs help bathing or hygiene, but even that sometimes is not enough. So I started by saying it's a journey of self-discovery and patience and compassion. But resources, they're there. But your best resources are the people around you that have had someone that has gone through it.
Yeah, and thank you, Bill, because I think this is another reason I thought this would be a great discussion today, because, you know, unless you've experienced it firsthand, you know, luckily I had my sister-in-law and I had another friend who went through this with her mom. And it was interesting because we had a chat, we've chatted many times, but with my friend, she said from the time her mother didn't understand that she wasn't drinking tea, like she would say she was drinking tea, but she really wasn't, like mixing up orange juice tea, like it's getting a decline. But from the time she did that, which seems subtle, to the time that she passed was 9 years of decline. And so the thing you need to understand is that there are different forms, right, of dementia. Alzheimer's is one specific form, and even within that, there are different forms. And so you don't know. And you know, there's a lot of testing. There's a lot of, like, my mom has been on so many different medications that aren't helping. Like they said, it's lost. Like in some cases, it may make her worse. But you know, we've been dealing with this probably for about 5 or 6 years now, where we realized, but when I started to taking her to appointments, and there's notes in the file that this was already a discussion. But, you know, my brother passed, so maybe he knew, but, you know, this communication about, again, being an advocate, and, you know, they're also in denial sometimes, right? Like they don't know. And even family members, like I have several siblings, and, you know, many of them have kind of, like you said, avoided because they can't handle it. They don't have the emotional, like we were going to talk a little bit about resilience and things, but when I first started when she was still on her own in her place before we moved her to another home, you know, even I was impatient. I wasn't very, you know, compassionate, I'd say. I was because I was frustrated with my family more than anything too, because I had the younger kids. I had a, you know, career. I was, you know, some of them, my 2 sisters lived far enough away. So, but I was really like, I've gone through all the emotions. Like you can get angry, you can get frustrated, you can get, you know, impatient, but at some point you need to start taking care of yourself and having that, you know, bringing the kindness out, which, you know, now it's really important. Like if I need to just sit with my mom, I just sit with my mom, and if she is, you know, continually repeating the same thing, we just chat, right? Sometimes it's just communication. I think also what I wanted to mention was, like, having the pandemic has really, really been a challenge as well, because, you know, my mom is in a home, but there's been outbreaks and things like that. And so you're stressed about them staying safe and healthy. And, you know, there's so much to navigate right now. So you need to really, you know, understand what you can do, because I can't shower my mother. Like, I don't have the patience, I don't have the skill set. That's what the professionals are there to help with. Like, I admire people trying to do this, but I feel like I remember once having to give my mom a bath at my house, and it was like, I thought she was going to be stuck in the bathtub for half an hour. Like, I'm like, I need help getting her up. It was like that eye-opening experience again, thinking that, how is this? So you mentioned CCAC, because people were looking for resources. Again, you know, caseworkers, you get to know caseworkers. We luckily have a wonderful caseworker. My mom was in an independent care, but then there's assisted living, and then there's a memory care floor. So we put her there knowing that there was going to potentially be that change. But here's the thing, we have the privilege and ability to be able to help her. She did not have a lot of money. So that's the other thing to navigate, is that, you know, you may have someone living with you because they didn't have their savings. They didn't save for retirement or for caregiving, and with the aging population. So, you know, you are then having to take her in the long-term care facilities. Well, we've all heard about the disaster that's been with the deaths and everything. It's been a tough year. I wanted to mention, if you are thinking about moving your parent, one resource we found very helpful was a place for mom. It's called A Place for Mom. Now it's also for dads too, but, you know, historically, I mean, you know, women outlive men, and, you know, so I guess that's why they came up with the name originally. But, you know, it's they were very, very helpful to my husband and I. My husband actually took up a lot of help navigating this while I was doing other things. But yeah, I mean, it's really, really important to take care of yourself first, though, too, because I don't always listen to my own advice, Bill. I don't know about you, but I'm getting better. So I mean, I don't know if anybody else has any questions. Feel free to hop out too if you want to, you know, put your hand up and speak or share an experience. This is, you know, I think that you know, counseling and having someone to talk to if they have that shared experience. But to your point earlier, you know, some of the counselors through EAP might help you with like resilience or, you know, mindfulness or breathe, whatever. But to really understand how to navigate this is very tricky. It's like I had to tell one of my clients today, I have to take a couple weeks off. I'm really sorry. It impacts my professionalism in a way, but, and we'll get into the career part, but my mom has to come first. I've got to get over there and figure she's wandering, and we have to figure out what's next, like what's going on. And she's disturbing other people. It's like, it's really, really hard. So I'll leave it at that. Bill, if you want to comment, if anybody else has anything they want to share, feel free.
Right. No, Helen, you raise a very good point and example. One of the things is, when I thought how I'm going to structure the conversation, is that taking care of yourself during this time is very important. And the reason is because it wasn't perfect in my world either. I gained about 20 pounds during, you know, my dad's hospitalization. I put myself aside. I tried to stretch myself thin with regards to my career, thinking I can handle everything. So I'd be working a shift and then leaving at 5 and then picking up my mom and driving downtown Toronto to Mount Sinai, staying a few hours with my dad and really trying to help him. And then coming back home late at night, not seeing my family, and then repeating that 4, 5, 6 times a week, right? So he became my focus over myself. So where you can get help for basic hygiene, if you're living with someone, you know, take advantage of the services that are there, and don't be afraid to ask for more, because generally you'll get 2 hours, 2 hours every, like 2 times a week. Don't be afraid to ask for more, because you'll always be offered the minimum. The other thing is that, you know, with regards to even what Helen was mentioning about career, is that the one thing right now during COVID that has really changed the world of work is that, you know, for example, my son may come in, I might focus on him. We're all getting used to having dogs, kids running around in the background, and you know, we're not, you know, in that structured environment anymore that we used to. But from an employer standpoint, you know, as Helen said, she needed to take time off. I took a month off leave of absence, and I felt that wasn't even enough, because I thought I was either going to cure my dad, help my dad, and somehow I was going to leave the hospital, or B, that I was going to miraculously turn everything around, and I was going to even have time to hit the gym and focus on myself. And I did none of that. So even with the time off, but now looking back in terms of priorities, is that my career was and is very important, but I'm in control of my career. You know, my time was the most important thing, because money even went down on the scale in terms of importance. So I would have rather traded my money for time at work. So for the HR, you know, professionals that are joining us today, is that if you have employees going through this, and there is no EAP, is, you know, compassion or understanding, because at that point, when you start to look at how you value things, time becomes the most important thing, and money often is, you know, the least on the scale. But you want to know that I can come back to my job, right? Because that still is important from a mental health aspect, to be able to sort of bring the individual back to work, you know, engage them, and ensure that they feel valued, supported, and secure, right? So those are the things that I look back now. In my particular situation, I ended up, my work situation, it wasn't working out. I don't think I can take any more time. So I left. It was, you know, I left my employment. My dad passed away 3 weeks later, but I would never trade those 3 weeks, you know, that I had with him for work. And I know that if I was continuing to work those 3 weeks, I wouldn't have been there for him. So I am able to look back and realize, yeah, it was actually the time more than anything else, because within a few months I bounced back, I had another job, you know, and I was able to focus. So that's important. So with Helen bringing that up, and for the HR professionals there, is ask your employees what is important to them. If it's time they need, because you can't have time and money, you'll have to make some sacrifices, but you realize that at the end of the day, they understand you can't have it all because their focus is on their parents, only because the system doesn't allow or provide the type of support that really is needed. And for me, yeah, sorry, and I was just
Go
gonna say, Helen,
ahead, finish up.
mentioned it too. I mean, I was angry. I was upset. I felt powerless. I was trying to help my dad. And I look back now, and like Helen said, every situation is different. My dad had, he's a very type A military background. So his Alzheimer's just made all of these good qualities like times 10. And then they became bad qualities because his moods were like resisting, pushing back, arguing, trying to assert control. And I'm just going to take a quick segue here, Helen, because when you're with someone who has Alzheimer's, like Helen said, if they say the sky is green, that sky is green today. And it's not because they see the color green, they see the color blue, but they will verbalize it as green, right? And if you try and correct them, and if they think you're somebody else, and if they call you somebody else, you go with it because they know who you are. They're just not verbalizing it the right way. And I saw frustration when my sister would come by and she would say, "Do you not recognize your grandchildren?" No, he didn't. And she was trying to convince him to the point where she would bring photographs and go, "Here you are, here's your grandkids." And he's looking at her going, "I don't understand what you're talking about." He's getting frustrated, right? I see that with my mom now. I talked to her yesterday and I said, "I'm going to come pick you up because we're going to go out." And she said, "Well, it's raining. It's been raining all day." It's been snowing. I know it's been snowing. But she sees snow. She realizes it's snow. But the word that came out of her mouth was rain. And I'm like, and that's where I'm doing things differently with my mom. I'm like, "Mom, it's not a lot. Don't worry about it," right? I may not use the word rain or reinforce that it's snow, but I'll say it's not a lot regardless. We're still good. And you find that they're understanding, they may not get defensive. And you know what? At the same time, they're aware of what's going on and they're scared. And they're trying to maintain their dignity on top of that. So it really means that I have had to have an out-of-body experience, which is probably the best way to explain it, with my mom, because I need to be her best friend, not her son, right? I need to be someone there to share a joke, to help her out, and not, for the most part, see her as my mom. Because, when she's having bad days and I can tell, I just listen, I agree. I might say a joke, but she'll say, "Well, where are we? Like, whose house is this?" Or, "Do I know you from somewhere? Are we somehow related?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, we go back a long way." And she'll be like, "Well, how do I know you?" "Well, I'm related to your husband." Right? So we have those kinds of conversations. I don't sit there and say, "I'm your son. Don't you recognize me?" or look at the picture. No. You can't.
Yeah.
"I'm related to your husband." "Oh, that's good." Yeah, I just try and change it a little bit, the direction of the conversation. And you know what? Maybe half an hour later, she's like, "Hey, Bill, what are you doing?" She's back.
I know, it's so amazing. I can so relate to that. And I do want to have time. It goes so quickly, these hours, especially with my tech difficulties at the beginning, but one day it'll be miraculous going well. My mom is in a home, so she started independent living. We've been getting a lot of CCAC support through Lynn and other, with the home she's in, a bit of assisted living, but there will be a time that she needs more. And when I hear about, in August, my mom was hospitalized. And so, she's starting to fall a bit. Like, this is where, not only, you're dealing with some of the memory You know, there's other things that start to go, like, you know, you get into the physical, which becomes difficult too. And so there's so many stages. So as I mentioned, and Pam and others, anybody that wants any resources, like, feel free to reach out. As I said at the end of the presentation, also on my website, lifeworkswell.ca, I always share the resources and presentations. But it's really educating yourself and learning. And I loved what you said about just being someone else, because my mom had a picture of myself and my husband on our wedding day. Yet every time I would go visit, and this was in the last year or so, she'd say, "So did you ever get married?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, you know, long time ago, just like let it go kind of thing." But you know, you had to, like, it was hard to stop to say, "That's me in the picture with Tim right there," right? And you know, it's not always easy, but the times that we just sat and laughed about something, it's just, that's what you're there. Sometimes it's just like, be what my sister-in-law in the quote I read earlier, and like her advice was like, just be who they need you to be that day. I've been finding it hard because of the breakouts. So I don't know if your mom's home had that, but there was a breakout earlier, so I couldn't go. And then I was able to go. I was able to become an essential caregiver, like one family member, which is probably what you are, Bill, because they're not letting everybody just go visit, right? So no one's able to. And so, you know, you get into that caregiver, like, I'm wearing the mask and the shield to go visit. Like, it's hard, because then she may not even see you anyway. Like, it's hard to see who you are. But that was just great when I got the routine of being able to just pick my time and be there every day to check in as to what's happening. But I have to tell you, for those joining, like, in those care facilities, it is a very, very isolating. When they have a breakdown, they're no longer able to go down to their dining room. They are in their rooms. This is what is creating even more, you know, anxiety and isolation in people even without dementia or Alzheimer's, right? Like, it's not a great world. So that's been hard, navigating visiting her in the hospital. I had to get her 24/7 care for a little while. Again, I'm blessed that I can do that. So word of advice is, start saving your money for when you need it down the road. But also, you know, there are ways of doing this if you have, you know, don't try to do it all yourself. Yeah. There was a second outbreak before Christmas, so we weren't able to see her. We arranged a Zoom. They were arranging Zoom calls, which was really nice. So the family members, because my family hasn't been able to go, I've been the only one. Not that they would anyway, but that's, again, I've let some of that go, you know, just worry about what I want to do and no one else. And they had another outbreak. And then my mom was hospitalized again recently. So, and then when you get those calls, like, you're trying to navigate your anxiety and your worry. When she was in the hospital last time, she would not leave. And I wasn't allowed to go to the hospital. Now, thankfully, it was only a one day. She wasn't overnight. They said they could keep her, but they allowed me to go pick her up. And that was probably one of the first times I've been able to see her in a bit, because of this outbreak that they had and all their regulations. And it's been so tough. So to see, this was really, really hard to see her. She was so afraid. She was like a young child again. And I'm wondering, like, what is she going back to? What memory? What is she afraid of, right? The nurse was amazing. Like, we really, really have to thank the caregivers, because, you know, as much as people may be negative sometimes, like, everybody's doing the best they can. We finally were able to get her in. And I tell you, she was so afraid to go in the car with me, but then she finally did. And we got her back to the home. By the time we drove, it was about a 10-minute drive only. She was so relaxed, and she knew me, and she went back into her home willingly. And she was like, "Hey, are you coming in? Come on in for a visit." Meanwhile, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So you just had to kind of like laugh at that and say, you know what, she's okay for now until I get that next call, which was like this week. So I really think, you know, I'm really thankful, Bill, because I have a few people I can talk to, but the more you can, you know, every situation's different. And as you go, like, what's next? Like, I have a sister-in-law who's a nurse too, so that's helpful because it's like, okay, what's our next, right? What is our next? Yeah. Well, my next is right now making priority time for my mom, because the work and all the other stuff can wait. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions for Bill you want to pop out, or either one of us? I know that it's not even easy sometimes to talk about these things.
It's, Helen, and again, a point, if anybody has any questions, it's an opportunity, because I'm not really sure what everybody's particular situation is. And I thought, you know, let me share my experience, because there's no right and there's no wrong answer. And my takeaways and what I want to share with the group is that from a personal perspective is patience and understanding. And Helen said, in terms of even the isolating environment that COVID has presented, you know, with my mom, she's healthy, but I can see the signs, and there's good days and bad days. But my mom grew up back in Greece, never went to school because they didn't allow girls to go to school. So she never had a formal education, never really learned English. So not only is she in her retirement home, but she is very limited in terms of her communication abilities with the staff. And what that means for me, and some of my friends, one or two who are on the call, know that when I'm with them, I'll be like, if my mom calls, I got to pick it up. It doesn't matter what I am doing or who I am with. They understand. Because I have given my mom a phone. She has a phone in her room, and it's got 3 big speed dial buttons, and I'm number 1, bang. So I tell my mom, call me whenever, doesn't matter. And she may call me 4 or 5 times a day. But when I see that phone ring, and I've lived by my phone with my dad for 10 months when he was in the hospital, just dreading it wouldn't ring. Because I didn't really know what to do or put up with it. With my mom, I've learned patience. So she'll call me, and she may call me like, you know, she won't call me like 10 times in a row, but she'll call me because she just needs to have to talk to someone. And I know I got to go from here to here. And it's like trying sometimes to be like, okay, is everything good? Yeah. Just that small little bit of interaction. And that's patience. That's what my dad taught me, is have patience. My dad was a lot different. He had none. But you know what? I could see pride, and I could see, you know, him wanting to continue to function the way he normally thought, but his body was limiting him. And I saw that on his face. So, but with my mom, it's like, you know, you call me whenever you want. If it's too many times, I will tell her, Mom, I'll call you later. And I give her a time, and I will call her at that time, because I know between the time she hangs up and the time she's looking at that clock, and she knows he said he's going to call me at 6, I'm going to wait for 6. So there are ways to, you know, manage, you know, with a parent, you know. And the one thing I want to suggest is one of the biggest things I learned, and Helen, I'm going a little bit off, and we're also getting up to the hour, and I want questions, if there's any. For those of you who do have a parent that lives with your other parent, in the hospital, or if any situations come by, one of the biggest helps that I had was that a friend of mine, who's now a friend of mine, but he had his father in the same room with my dad. We were sitting there one day in the hospital, and you make friends, just talk to everybody. He shared with me a part of a law in Ontario. It's sort of like a patient bill of rights. And hospitals are really motivated sometimes by profit, even though we do have healthcare. And the hospital was trying to treat my father and then release him back home. But hospitals also have a duty of care. So they should not be releasing a patient into an environment where the patient or the caregiver is not safe. So this happened to work to our advantage, because my father could not take care of himself, and you could not expect my mom, who was 78 years old, to take care of him too. So we were able to leave my dad in the hospital for longer until proper care for him was found. So if it's your mom or your dad, you know, and the hospital's telling you you can release them and go back home, and they're willing to offer you the world in terms of support, ask for the maximum possible support, because they'll offer you the minimum. It is too. You know, you got to remember that this is all transactional as well. You want the best for your parents or the individual. So it is transactional. So when the hospital says to you, he's ready or she's ready to go home and we can offer you services, ask for the maximum possible. But if you think it's not safe for your parent or that person to go back home because their caregiver is at risk, you have the right to have them stay at the hospital until a space opens up for them in a care facility. That is not very well known. That is what allowed us to ensure that my dad had care in the hospital and my mom wasn't at risk.
Yeah, well, that's really helpful and
do some research.
Yeah, it's important because when I think about my mom's, like, so she's been in the hospital 3 times probably in the last 2 years, but the one time they were very good. We were really making sure she wasn't going to be released till we knew we could set up the care, extra care back at the home. And again, because I mean, I'm going to be honest, like, to have 24/7 care for like a month, she broke her humerus. And she, you know, it's like she was delirious a little bit. And so that's where the safety is starting to be an issue, right? And even if you have supports in place, it's not always 24/7. So they can get up and slip and fall. And when you can't be there, like the last year, like all the time to be there checking in, you're relying on others. And I mean, I have to say she's had wonderful care. A lot of this is not through anyone's fault. I mean, you know, my mom does get a little like agitated, but you know, you have to make sure they're getting the supports that they need. So that's really important. And one other thing I wanted to mention was about for the HR professionals or people that are in a workplace that, you know, there's more and more supports now from a human rights perspective on accommodation and caregiving. Now, historically, some of the cases have been around children and they have to have a disability, but it's shifting. So flexibility in your work is something. And I mean, for those on the road, the call, there's a couple of my colleagues here who we believe in results-oriented work where it doesn't matter like the time when, like if you can provide flexibility as an employer, don't be afraid to seek what you need from a flexibility perspective first. We're taking them to appointments for all of that. I mean, we hope that if anything, this pandemic has helped us with having more compassionate leaders in our workplaces to understand this. But, you know, and there are other leaves of absence, and there are other supports for caregiving that are legally required. So make sure you ask HR professionals or reach out to someone that's been through, that has been able to navigate it, and don't be afraid to ask for it, because not only is it the right thing to do, but there are some legally required supports for these types of things. So I know we're getting close to the end. What I will do, I was going to share the screen with some of the other resources and everything, but for those who attended, I'll have Jennifer, who is, thanks Jennifer, she always keeps me organized. She's on these calls and she's one of my marketing assistants and who helps a lot in the business. And so I'll have her send it out directly as well for those that aren't on my newsletter distribution list. But if you do want to, beyond that, you know, again, my website, lifeworkswell.ca, I'm really about, because there's a lot of organizations that are larger that have a lot of supports, the organizations that don't, I support, because they're the ones that really need it. They, you know, they don't understand how to navigate some of this. So again, anyone last minute question before we have a few more minutes?
Yeah, Zandra has a question here, and thank you. Zandra, it says, Visiting your dad in the hospital, Sandra has her dad's in the hospital, as was mine, and situation very similar to what I'm experiencing is that, I'd go visit my father, and Sandra, let me know if this answers your question. I'd go visit my father in the hospital too. And like I said, there's good days and bad days, because later on in the day, as the day gets longer, you learn the term sundowning, which for those of you who haven't heard it before, is that, the individual, their condition starts to sort of, go down. So the evenings are a lot more difficult than the days sometimes. But when I visited my dad, I would often have to sneak out and leave, but I learned after a fact that, he would want to leave naturally because nothing's wrong with him. And, so he'd want to go to church too, and he'd want to go back home, and he'd ask when he's going home. I would say, look, we need some tests. I tell him, we need some tests. You need to stay here. You need to cooperate. But at the same time, if you're going, instead of sneaking, I would stay with him sometimes until he fell asleep, because I'd say, just have a sleep. I'm going to go home, get cleaned up, and I'll be back. But in order for me to leave easier, I would commit to seeing him again. And I'd let him know fully well, knowing when I can see him again. So if I said, Dad, I'm going to be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock, or if I'm going to be back the day after at 6 o'clock, I made sure I was there. Which, it's reassuring to him, because the other thing with Alzheimer's is that one of the things that, when I said about baseline earlier, is that a change in environment, a change in situation creates that disorientation and the confusion sometimes that has them drop. So consistency is key. If you're going to say you're going to show up, show up. Be open with your conversations. Explain to them that, there's a few tests that need to be run. You're going to be fine, but cooperate and enjoy it. Relax, have something to eat. I will be back. When the nurses come in, let them help, and that just understanding, because you don't know if they're aware where they are, but they're tying into the old ways, church, home, like something familiar. So you have to make sure that you bridge that gap between where they are today and familiarity. But say, do, and commit. Like, that is what they're looking for. I found out with my dad, is consistency.
Wow, that's great advice. Yeah, the first couple of times you see the sundowning, it's very, very difficult. And my mom is Polish, so a lot of times she'll revert to speaking Polish. And, I think it's just, again, trying to navigate. Okay, on that note, the tech is gonna, I really just wanted to take a minute to thank you, Bill, again. For those who joined, we do have, when you signed up, we have the email. So we're happy to send the recording and the presentation. It will be on our website as well, and on the YouTube channel. And there'll be some resources at the end of the presentation. So I really just wanted to thank everybody that showed up today, and for the questions, and reach out to myself anytime if you want. I can, share my experience, and also, again, resources. And Bill, it was just great chatting openly with you. I really, really do appreciate you sharing your, being open about sharing your experience, and continuing, right? So we're here to support each other as well. And so for everyone else, reach out anytime. As I said, I'm at helen@lifeworkswell.ca. I host a mentor circle on a different topic every month. And next month is Black History Month. So if you're interested, I have a speaker coming on that's amazing. So, but I really, really appreciate an opportunity and space to have these open dialogues, and know that, you're not alone when you're trying to navigate it. So thanks again, Bill. We'll be in touch. And everybody else, I really, really appreciate you joining us. And have a great day. So I'm going to sign off, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.